It started with an innocent mistake, or so I thought. My connecting flight from Denver to Seattle was delayed, leaving me stranded at the airport well past midnight. Exhausted and irritated, I scanned the departure board, desperate for an earlier flight. That's when I saw it. Flight 815, boarding at gate 13, departing in 30 minutes. Odd, I thought. I didn't remember seeing it listed before. The gate was tucked away in a dimly lit corner of the terminal. As I approached, I couldn't shake the uneasy silence. The usual chatter of passengers, the hum of announcements, and the clatter of rolling suitcases were absent. It felt wrong. Still, I shrugged it off. I was tired and just wanted to get home. When I handed my boarding pass to the gate agent, she barely glanced at it before waving me through. Her smile was tight, her eyes distant. The jet bridge was colder than usual, and as I stepped onto the plane, a chill ran down my spine. The cabin was dimly lit, with passengers already seated, their faces obscured by shadows. "Welcome aboard," a flight attendant said, her voice soft and mechanical. Her expression didn't change as she gestured toward my seat. I settled into my row near the window, glancing around. The other passengers didn't seem to acknowledge me. They stared straight ahead or out their windows, their movements unnervingly slow. The air felt heavy, thick with an unplaceable smell, a mix of old leather and something metallic. As we taxied onto the runway, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Thank you for joining us on Flight 815. Estimated flight time to Seattle is undetermined." His words lingered, as if he'd said something he shouldn't have. The plane took off smoothly, but the atmosphere inside grew increasingly oppressive. The hum of the engines was too loud, drowning out any attempts at conversation. When I reached for the in-flight magazine, I froze. The cover was dated 1973, with faded colors and outdated fonts. Flipping through it, I noticed the articles were oddly vague, referencing events I couldn't place. "Excuse me," I whispered to the man seated beside me. He didn't react. I tapped his shoulder lightly, and he slowly turned to face me. His eyes were empty, like polished glass, and his face was pale and expressionless. My stomach churned as I quickly looked away. The flight attendant passed by, her movements stiff. I mustered the courage to flag her down. "Miss, can I ask you something?" She paused, tilting her head unnaturally. "Yes?" Her voice was monotone, almost lifeless. "When are we landing?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Soon enough, sir. Just sit back and enjoy the flight." Before I could press further, she walked away, disappearing into the galley. Panic began to claw at me. I turned on the in-flight screen, hoping to distract myself. The map showed a blinking plane icon, but there was no route, no destination, just a vast, empty void. The time to arrival flashed erratically. 0000, 2345, 1234. My pulse quickened. The cabin lights dimmed further, and I realized something horrifying. The passengers around me were no longer moving. Their heads were tilted at odd angles, their hands resting limply in their laps. The hum of the engines grew louder, vibrating through my chest. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood, gripping the back of the seat for support. "Is anyone else seeing this?" I called out. No one responded. My voice felt swallowed by the oppressive silence. I stumbled toward the galley, hoping to find a crew member. The curtains were drawn, but faint whispers emanated from behind them. Gathering my courage, I pulled the curtain aside. The space was empty, save for the faint scent of burning metal. A hand touched my shoulder, and I spun around to see the flight attendant. Her face was unnervingly close, her glassy eyes staring into mine. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice layered with an echo, as if multiple voices spoke at once. "What is this? What's happening?" I demanded. Her smile widened unnaturally. "You boarded the wrong flight." Before I could react, the plane lurched violently. I stumbled back into my seat as the cabin lights flickered. The passengers began to stir, their movements jerky and disjointed. A low, guttural hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Out the window, the clouds had turned an unnatural shade of crimson. Lightning flickered, illuminating shadowy shapes moving alongside the plane. My heart pounded as I realized they weren't planes or birds. They were something else entirely, their forms shifting and pulsating. The captain's voice returned, distorted and warped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived. Please prepare for departure." But there was no runway below, no city lights, just an endless expanse of dark, roiling clouds. The passengers began to rise, their glassy eyes locking onto me. One by one, they reached out, their cold hands brushing against my skin. I screamed, clawing at my seatbelt, desperate to escape. The last thing I remember was the flight attendant's face, inches from mine, as she whispered, "Welcome home." When I woke up, I was in an empty field, my clothes damp with dew. The plane was gone, and the sky above was clear. In my hand was a boarding pass, crumpled and worn. The date read June 23rd, 1973. I never found out what happened that night. But sometimes in the dead of night, I hear the distant hum of engines overhead, and I wonder if Flight 815 is still out there, searching for its next passenger.